Welcome to Horsemen.
This is the final episode of Season 1. For information about Season 2, hang in there, and after the credits, I'll tell you something important.
Episode 10, Apocalypse.
Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich, and the strong, and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, "Fall on us, and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?" Book of Revelation, chapter 6, verse 15. To some, it would seem to be a remarkable coincidence that Colonel Hubert Wealthy Dutton, Jr. would have paid a visit to the Anadar Institute on the same day that Noland Blackhorse and Jonas McInnes finally arrived. But the colonel did not believe in coincidence. He did not believe in accidents or anything like chaos. Later, when he saw the importance of that day, September 23rd, 2017, he could see how everything had been laid out to make sure he and the others were gathered in the same place. He could see how none of them had any choice. What led him to the Anadar Institute on that particular day was a 5-year commitment to lead Operation Red Dragon, a mission to research, capture, and then weaponize psionics, or more broadly, the occult. His purview included all paranormal activity, from psychics to mediums, to people who could bend spoons with their minds. In the 5 years since Colonel Dutton, he had been promoted to colonel when he took the leadership position, had run Operation Red Dragon, he had learned a great many things. He had learned, for example, that there were no such things as UFOs, that every single instance of an alien sighting or abduction or capture of alien technology or anything that had to do with life from another part of the universe was all imaginary. It was hysteria, and in many cases, hysteria intentionally created by individuals or groups who wished to remain anonymous. That was another thing he learned, that throughout history there have been groups of powerful men, almost always men, who helped each other consolidate power and leverage it for their own well-being. Most esoteric institutions like the Rosicrucians, the Masons, the Illuminati, and the many secret societies of the modern world have had the singular aim of making sure the strings of power are pulled by only a select few. He learned that although many of these institutions were now shells of what they used to be, they still existed, and some of them still had a great deal of power. Most extraordinary of all, he had learned that certain bodiless, intelligent, and conscious forces had an impact on our physical world. Who these forces were, what their motivations were, and how it all worked was still mostly a mystery, but it was now clear to Hubert that they existed. These energies were considered sources of power in many circles, certainly by the aforementioned secret societies. The occult, as it is generally called, had long been investigated by various professional, governmental, and societal groups, all with one aim: to harness that power. Before Operation Red Dragon, Hubert had thought the occult was all fiction, the product of wishful or fearful thinking. But unlike with UFOs, he himself now had personal proof of their existence. He had witnessed what some would call ghosts, and one of these instances set him on direct course to find the Anadar Institute. He and 2 members of his team had gone to the site of what was labeled a haunted house. One of the technicians set up the detection equipment, the single-axis EMF meters, as well as trifold meters, while the other technician set up the full spectrum camera and audio recording equipment. Hubert, meanwhile, walked around. He monitored his emotions and physical sensations as he walked, using them as data as well as what he saw or heard. Suddenly, the EMF meter began pinging from the front foyer, signaling a change in its readings. At that exact moment, Hubert was in an upstairs hallway, facing the figure of, well, a transparent woman. When she looked at Hubert, he felt every hair on his body rise up. A flutter of energy moved up and down his spine, and his tongue thickened. Taking mental notes of all these sensations, he called out, "We've got something here!" The technician with the recorders began to clatter his way up the stairs. But before he arrived, the woman figure said, "The flood did not end the reign of the Watchers. They are still with you. But the beast will soon take control. Find him in the desert before he captures the Horsemen. They alone will bring revelation." He recognized some of the language. The flood could have been referenced to any of numerous floods in numerous religious texts. Revelation was obvious, as was the beast and horsemen. It was all apocalyptic text from the Apostle John. But Watchers, that was new. That was unfamiliar. The technician, of course, captured nothing. The figure was gone before he arrived. So Hubert chose to receive the communication as a personal message, to assume that his ghost wished to deliver a specific message only to him. He did so not out of sense of importance or destiny, but because it simply lined up. The ghost woman appeared only to him and no one else, and he was given specific instructions in a metaphoric language that was familiar to him, or mostly familiar. It didn't take long, however, to learn about the Watchers. They were mentioned in the Book of Enoch, an ancient, non-canonical Jewish text ascribed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. The book was considered an apocalyptic text, as it foretells the second coming of the Messiah and the end times of the earth. The Watchers, according to Enoch, were angels that came to earth with the intention of watching humanity and helping however they could. In time, however, the Watchers became attached to humanity and even had children with humans. These were the giants of Nephilim, who created chaos and destruction on the earth. It was the Nephilim who were apparently washed away during the great flood of Noah and the ark. That was apparently God's intention, to rid the earth of these giants. But according to this ghost, the Watchers, the parents of the giants, were still here. With this new information, Hubert looked at the message again. The flood did not end the reign of the Watchers. They are still with you, but the beast will soon take control. Find him in the desert before he captures the Horsemen. They alone will bring revelation. So yes, it seemed these angelic forces who had mingled with humanity were still on earth. Perhaps their children were washed away in the flood, but the Watchers were still with us. What the ghost had said about the beast was interesting to him. The beast, apparently, would soon take control. The beast was a term often used for the force that would usher in the apocalypse, that would signal the end times. The most common translation of the Greek word for beast was Antichrist, but Hubert was curious how this word was used in the Book of Enoch. He contacted the linguist on the team who had knowledge of ancient alphabets and requested she find the word used in the Book of Enoch for the beast, the original word, and then let him know what language it was and how that word could best be translated. A few hours later, he got a response. Apparently, the Book of Enoch was originally written in Aramaic, and the Aramaic word used for beast, which she said was better translated as dishonorable crown, was Anadar. In the Book of Enoch, A dishonorable crown would bring in the apocalypse. This made a lot more sense to Hubert than beast or antichrist. There were a few choice, dishonorable leaders on the world stage at that time, and he could see one in particular who might just be teasing the apocalypse. But the word Anadar also felt familiar to him. He had encountered it before. Was it a part of the research he'd been given originally? Was it someone's name? He did an internet search, and there, at the top of the list, was the Anadar Institute. Right, the best-selling pseudo-doctor on TV, the guy who tells stories to his patients. He opened up the link on the screen and read some more about the Institute. Dr. Raymond Anadar, not a medical doctor, but a doctor of semiotics. Nice. And molecular biology. That wasn't the first match Hubert would have made with semiotics. But anyway. Then he read a piece of marketing language that took his breath. Unveiling the truth in healing and transformation. Unveiling gave him the shivers. And once again, every hair on his body rose in confirmation. He noted his physiological response, then recalled that the true translation of the Greek word apocalypse is unveiling. Unveiling. This was enough confirmation for him. He had had 5 years of following these subtle physical signs, tightenings of the stomach, hairs rising up, shivers, throat constricting. And when he had paid attention and honored these signs, his percentage of success was very high. He was a creature of data, and in this case, the data confirmed that it was time to go to the Anadar Institute. He went alone and out of uniform. When he set up the meeting, he said it was to talk about how this kind of narrative therapy might be helpful with post-traumatic stress disorder. That he was not a doctor, but would come as a military administrator with the goal of getting the bureaucratic ball rolling on a possible new protocol. The people he spoke with were very interested and set up a meeting with Dr. Anadar. What happened in the meeting proved to be less important or interesting than what had happened in the next building over. While Colonel Hubert Wealthy Dutton Jr. and Dr. Raymond Anadar discussed the transformation of traumatic memories by changing the story about those memories, a moment that would change the course of history was taking place merely 200 yards away. Hubert did not know exactly what was happening, but he could feel that something was. He'd become so attuned to his bodily sensations when he was in the presence of the paranormal that there was no way he could ignore it. His heart was racing, his breath was tight, he was getting chills up and down his spine, and yes, the hairs on his body were all standing at attention. "I wonder," he finally said during his talk with Dr. Anadar, "I wonder if I might see more of the campus. It's so beautiful and innovative from the outside. Would it be an imposition to see more?" Dr. Anadar looked at the colonel and hesitated. Normally, he would open all doors and proudly show anyone around. But the fact was, he was feeling the same things that the colonel was feeling, the same sensations. And he had come to a similar conclusion. Something very big was happening, and he wasn't sure if it was something good for him and his institute. "There are," he said, trying to seem like he wasn't hiding anything, "some rooms of patients. We call them members that obviously must remain private. But absolutely, yes. In fact, I'd love to show you myself." "Thank you. That would be excellent," said Hubert, struggling to seem normal. Both men were so focused on what they were feeling that they didn't notice how strangely the other was acting. They both stood and went outside. The sun seemed different. The clouds seemed different. The landscape seemed a little darker, and the air seemed thicker. Something was definitely off. Something was happening that was not good. "What's over there?" asked the colonel, pointing to the building next door. Everything in his body was saying to him, "It's in there. The source of all this strangeness is in there. "Oh," said Dr. Anadar, who was beginning to feel the flutters of panic. "It's not... that building is one of the member dormitories, and... would you excuse me for a moment? I need to check inside there to see something before we continue the tour. Just a moment." Then Dr. Anadar offered a quick, strained smile and turned on his heels. As the colonel watched him go, the feelings of anxiety and overwhelm continued to build inside him. Little thoughts like, "Get out of here now," buzzing around his brain. But the soldier in him kept him on task. The man who did not let emotions cloud his judgment. That part of him said, "Follow the doctor and see what's inside that building." So, as soon as Dr. Anadar entered the building and closed the door, the colonel approached. Though he was in civilian clothes, he had brought along his sidearm, and now he pulled it out. Something very wrong was happening in that building, and he needed to make sure he and any others were safe. He approached and looked around. A few of the members or staff, all dressed in linen, were walking from one building to another, and noticed he had drawn a weapon. "Call the police!" he called to one of them. "I'm a plainclothes officer of the United States government. Call the police to get here now." They nodded, wide-eyed, and ran back to the building they'd just left. Colonel Dutton approached the door and took hold of the knob. Cautiously he opened it. Immediately, he felt an intense buzzing in his ears. It wasn't a sound, just a vibration. And though it was very uncomfortable, he continued to open the door and enter. The hallway was empty, but he heard voices from a room down the hall. Idling his gun in front of himself, he moved toward the sound. Several voices seemed to be chanting, saying something in unison. It sounded like a crowd of people. What was this? By the time he reached the door to the room, the vibration in his ear had spread throughout his entire body. It vibrated along with the words being chanted inside. Where was the doctor, he wondered. Was it safe to enter alone? He chose to go in. The doctor could be in trouble. He took hold of the knob, then quickly pushed the door open. The sound was overwhelming. Mixed in with the chanting voices was the piercing whine of what sounded like a horn, a constantly blowing horn. Instinctively, his hands flew up to cover his ears, and he dropped his gun. He winced as he saw what was happening in the room. 4 figures stood over a fifth who was lying on the floor. One of the standing figures was a woman dressed in linen, who looked to be in her late 30s. Next to her was a man who could have been 50. He seemed sick or beat up and was wearing ratty clothes. Beside him stood an ancient-looking Native American man who had to be in his 80s at least. Next to them, perhaps hovering, was the semi-transparent image of a young woman dressed in old-time hospital garb. It was a ghost. All 4 of them were repeating the same words as they looked down at the figure on the ground. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. Colonel Hubert Wealthy Dutton, Jr. could now see that the figure on the ground was Dr. Anadar. He didn't know if the man was dead, or had passed out, or what had happened. But he knew that the same fate would befall him if he stayed. With one last look at the 4 chanting figures, he turned and staggered down the hallway. He burst out of the door into the landscape around him. And for a moment, a terrifying moment, it seemed to him that the buildings, the grass, and even the sky were on fire. The apocalypse, he thought. The apocalypse has begun.
Horsemen the podcast was written by Chance the Lighthouse Man with narrative and technical support from David.
This section was redacted. This section was redacted. This section was redacted.
The series was directed by me, Jason Phelps, and you can learn more about what I do for you at jasonphelpscreates.com. The voice for the Red Horse stories was Catherine Catmull. The voice of the Pale Horse was Sienna Powers. The Red Dragon stories were told by Ken Webster. David told the stories for Raymond Anadar, and I was the teller for the White Horse. Jenny Eisenman was the voice of the Higher Power. The music was by Angus Sewell McCann, and Massimo Bocconi created the artwork. So here is what you need to know at this point. There is a lot more to tell about this story. As you may recall from episode 9, we cannot tell you the next set of stories until we reach quorum. What this means is that we need to reach a minimum number of people before season 2 can be told. It's just how things are. So tell people about these stories. If each of you got 3 people to subscribe today, we can start production for season 2. To be clear, I didn't say tell 3 people, I said get 3 people to subscribe. When quorum is reached, season 2, where we get Chance the Lighthouse Man's story as well as find out what has happened since the apocalypse began and why it began, well, those stories will become available. So it's up to you. Thanks for listening, and if the world is ready and we're able to reach quorum soon, well, I'll see you then.